Really? Good. Great. All right. As last time, as I mentioned, to make what we're going to study here most effective is the mind of enlightenment. Oh, Chukumbela, please. If you prefer to. Do you want to? Okay. Yeah, please go. So to make it most beneficial, having love, compassion, having basically a mind that doesn't want to study all this just for our own benefit, but mainly for the benefit of all sentient beings. Right? It makes it so much more effective. So it's important to start every class, ideally every Dharma activity, with that type of motivation. And of course, as I said many times, it's fake initially. However, it becomes less and less fake. And eventually it's going to be something that pops up naturally, that pops up all the time, basically. Right? Because it's so much become part of our own mind. Thank you. Ooh, plenty. Therefore, let's start together. It makes it that much stronger if we do it together as a group. And this time remembering there's so little differences between us. What we consider to be differences, they're minor. There's one thing we all have in common, and that drives all our actions, which is the wish to be happy. That natural impulse, that natural, just need to be happy. And that can become a kind of obsession, like an affliction, like an attachment. But even without that, it's just a natural part of our mind. It's in the nature of our mind to want to be happy. And everyone deserves to be happy. Right? I mean, sometimes we eat the wrong kind of food and we get sick. But we wouldn't think the person deserves to be sick just because they ate the wrong kind of food. Unknowingly, they ate something that, I don't know, gave them diarrhea or whatever. But in the end, everyone deserves to be healthy. And so although we constantly create the causes of our suffering, but just because we don't know, we're actually harming ourselves. Those in power thinking, I'm going to invade a country, whatever, believing that brings them and maybe their countrymen and women their country happiness, well, they're harming themselves more than anyone else, really. So based on that, the understanding that we're all the same, we just want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. And everyone has the right to do so. So to remember that everyone is just like us. Even if we don't know them, we know that we have in common with them. That's true for people, that's true for animals, that's true for any kind of life. And now we have the chance to find happiness, to find that kind of happiness we're looking for, lasting happiness. And we have the chance to develop our mind in such a way that we can actually help others to find that kind of happiness. That is so precious. So to reflect on that, fortune that we have right now, being able to develop our mind, let's do it not just for our own benefit, but for all other sentient beings. To bring them that which they crave so much, lasting happiness. Right? Okay, so let's do that together. And once we've generated the mind of enlightenment, we do the prayers. Again, the first two prayers in English. We'll move on to doing them in Tibetan, but I think it's still too early. All right, let's start. So just take a few moments to focus on your breath. To bring your mind into the present moment. And then remember our differences are outweighed by what we have in common. Most importantly, the natural wish to be happy. To not experience problems and difficulties. To not have unpleasant experiences. That's what drives every living being's actions. And every living being has the right to find that kind of happiness or satisfaction. And since we're connected to all other sentient beings, directly or indirectly, and since we've met a system that teaches us how to find lasting happiness, let's generate the sincere aspiration to become fully enlightened, to achieve the enlightened state of a Buddha. So that we're able in the most effective way to show others how to get there. So without letting go of that mind, the mind of enlightenment, let's recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayer 3 times and the 4 measurables once. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merits of listening to the teachings, may I achieve Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment and anger that holds some close and others distant. Okay, great. Now we'll continue. And I thought, well, to give you a short summary. Summaries are good. We've covered a lot throughout the last few days, and maybe you'll find it helpful to just quickly go over some of the main points, especially since I haven't answered, well, at least one question that came a little late last time. Okay, so what we've been studying so far is the beginning part of, well, Chandrakirti's entering into the middle way by way of studying Tsongkhapa's text, illuminating the intent. So we really started with Lama Tsongkhapa's text. And like many traditional Buddhist texts, it starts with the preliminaries. There are always some preliminaries. And more specifically, it starts with what's called like a devotional framework, like a devotional kind of aspect, which is quite typical in classical Buddhist writing. In fact, respect and reverence is seen as extremely helpful for understanding the Dharma. Which is one of the reasons why, for instance, devotion to one's Lama, seen as inseparable from the Buddha and the other masters, is seen as the root of the path. It's just something about that mind that psychologically makes our mind more receptive and touches us on a deeper level. And that's very important for a deeper understanding. So anyway, the author helps us to possibly generate that sense of admiration or just make this connection with these great masters of the past on the basis whose writings are the basis for everything we study. So the author, Lama Tsongkhapa, he pays homage, shows deep respect to a line of masters. So there are actually 7 verses. I'm not going to say that much about them, but the first verse is like a summary. He's saying, I pay my respect to my own Lama. That's very important, one's own, the personal master one can, of course, communicate with. But through the Lama, we can communicate also with the Buddha, Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, and so forth. So Lama Tsongkhapa therefore says, my own Lama, the Buddha, Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom, Nagarjuna, the great pioneer of the view of emptiness, and Nagarjuna's disciples or followers like Ayadeva, Buddhapalita. I'm so grateful to you guys. I pay my deepest respect to you. Okay. So it's like a summary, if you like. And then he goes on, he zooms into these different masters and explains a little bit about their greatness, saying a few words about them. So this is not just a formality, as we've heard before, but especially this kind of style here, it kind of lays out this lineage. And the author is positioning himself within this specific philosophical tradition. And he's also showing that what he's teaching is not his own invention, but something that has been passed down through an authentic line of great masters going all the way back to the Buddha. These verses, at least in Tibetan, are very beautifully written. It doesn't come across in the English so much, because if you use like beautiful poetic style, you probably have to change some of the meaning, and so the author decided to stick to the meaning. But in Tibetan, they're very beautiful. They use a lot of sophisticated poetic imagery that's very typical of Sanskrit or Tibetan devotional literature. So first he praises the Buddha, describing him as, which I think is beautiful, an unacquainted friend, a friend we're not familiar with. So in the sense that he helps all sentient beings, including ourselves, although most sentient beings haven't personally met the Buddha. He's also the eyes, he's described as the eyes of the world, helping us to see reality. Then he praises Manjushri, the embodiment of wisdom, who explains the profound and fearless teachings on emptiness and dependent arising that came from the Buddha, who's described as a lion, powerful and fearless, and his teachings on emptiness are like a lion's roar. Then he moves on to Nagarjuna, who teaches the middle way free of extremes, but also compassionately seizes us with this hook of compassion. Also a very beautiful kind of metaphor or imagery. He praises Ayadeva, the main disciple, one of the main disciples of Nagarjuna, who reached great realizations based on what Nagarjuna taught. And based on these realizations, he composed his 400 verses, which is available in English translation. Beautiful text, beautiful translation. Next is Buddhapalita, who traveled the state of a perfected knowledge holder, he says. And then he honors Chandrakirti and Shantideva. All right, saying that they laid out the complete path of the Buddha and Nagarjuna. So you get introduced to these masters. And then, after this verse of homage, he makes the promise to compose the text. And in this context, he specifically mentions what are called the three great charioteers. So that's an important distinction, important to know. If you study Madhyamika, that always comes up. These three masters that I explained here to be the three great charioteers. Now, to break it down, as I said last time, but just to say it again, the one who introduced, so we talk about, of course, Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna introduced, or Nagarjuna taught the fundamental wisdom. So that's the kind of root text. But it was Buddhapalita. I think it was around the 5th century, I think it's Buddhapalita. 4th or 5th century, yeah, something around that time. He introduced the Prasangika chariot tradition. So chariot tradition as in like a philosophical view that like a chariot takes us somewhere. So a philosophical tradition of the Prasangika. He introduced it. So meaning the idea of emptiness, the emptiness of inherent existence. And how did he introduce it? By using the Prasangika method of mainly using logical consequences, right? To point out the logical absurdities of a view that's in opposition to the lack or the emptiness of inherent existence. Now, Banu, one of the members of the discussion group who's not here, he wrote, at the very end, he wrote, well, why is Nagarjuna not considered to be the person who introduced Prasangika philosophy? He's usually described as the Madhyamika, the middle way trailblazer. That's what he's known for. But not the Prasangika Madhyamika system. Why is that? Why is that? Why is that? Why did I forget Nagarjuna? No, that didn't forget Nagarjuna, but it seems like they kind of skimped, they kind of jumped, they kind of ignored Nagarjuna and went right to Buddhapalita saying he introduced it. Why is that? Why is Nagarjuna not mentioned? No, not because it didn't emphasize the conventional truth much. No, that's not the reason. Actually, in his writing, you can take his fundamental wisdom in particular is accepted by both Prasangika and Svatantrika. It can be, he didn't exclusively draw a sharp line between the Prasangikas and the Svatantrikas, right? He, of course, actually it's accepted that he composed it from the point of view of the Prasangika view and also the method, but it wasn't as clearly laid out. That's why. Buddhapalita, it was more obvious. Oh, it's Prasangika. Lack of inherent existence, phenomena don't exist. So it was more obvious from his writing that this was a unique Prasangika view and even method. Now with the method, like I said, the view is emptiness. Emptiness from the point of view of the Prasangika school. That was much clearer. It's much clearer from his writing that this is the view he explained than from Nagarjuna's writing. Okay. It was necessary. Nagarjuna didn't have to make it that clear. But when Buddhapalita came along, it was the right time to write it in such a way, write his commentary, write the text that is also called Buddhapalita. The commentary is also called Buddhapalita. It was just the right time to say, okay, there is a distinction between these two views. And Svatantrika is the closest to the Prasangika in terms of its view. It's very, very close. And it's important to study it also for us, and we will to a certain degree, because then we can demarcate, we can clearly see, oh, this far it's Svatantrika, this far it's Prasangika. Okay, so that's the difference. And also in terms of the method, you may argue, well, Nagarjuna, he used these reductio ad absurdum, these reductions to the absurd. So, in other words, these logical absurdities in order to refute someone's wrong view. But it wasn't that obvious. For instance, Bhava Viveka, later on, the great Svatantrika master called Bhava Viveka, he criticized Buddhapalita for this technique. He didn't criticize Nagarjuna, so he obviously didn't really notice that Nagarjuna, he wasn't that aware of Nagarjuna using that technique. It became more obvious on the basis of Buddhapalita's commentary, right? And so therefore, the person who introduced it for the first time was Buddhapalita. But that's all he did. He only introduced it. Then came along Chandakirti. So based on that introduction by Buddhapalita, Chandakirti in the 7th century, he introduced, of course, based on Buddhapalita, he fully set up the school, fully set up the Prasangika school. Where did he do it? In his Entering the Middle Way, where he clearly distinguished Prasangika, Svatantrika. Clearly distinguished. So for us, it's clear from his writing what is the difference between the two. We are less likely to make the mistake interpreting something to be actually Svatantrika, but believing it to be Prasangika. All right. Or reading a text on the Svatantrika school and believing that to be the final view. Okay. So he did this in his Entering the Middle Way, and therefore Chandakirti is said to be the one who opened, who founded the Prasangika chariot tradition. He didn't just introduce it, he founded it, he set it up. He opened that tradition, right? So we think of introducing, that's pretty much opening it, but it's just a slight opening. It's not that complete opening. It's not that setting it up, establishing this particular tradition. So therefore, Chandakirti is described as the Prasangika opener of the chariot tradition, which is just another word for saying trailblazer, pioneer. He's usually considered to be the pioneer, the trailblazer of the Prasangika. But it's still important to not ignore Buddhapalita. He introduced it, so still important. Therefore, Buddhapalita is the Shingde Sul De in Tibetan. Shingde Sul means the, or the Tengyupa Shingde Sul De. Tengyupa means Prasangika. Shingde Sul means the tradition of the chariot. And De here means to start or to introduce. Okay. Then comes Chandakirti. He's the Shingde Sul Che. Che means to open. So the one who opened the Prasangika or the Tengyupa Shingde Sul Che, which means opening the Prasangika chariot tradition. Not opening, sorry. Yeah, opening the tradition, that is setting it up, establishing it. Okay. And that is the Shingde Sul Zin. Tengyupa Shingde Sul Zin, which is the one who upheld the Prasangika chariot tradition, Shantideva. Okay. Now the question that may arise is like, why just Shantideva? Okay, Buddhapalita is just one who introduced it, one who really set it up. Okay, but there's so many who upheld Shantideva. So many who upheld what Buddhapalita and Chandakirti brought forth or established, right? So many. Why mention Shantideva? Okay, so why these three? And this question was asked to a contemporary master called Geshe Pandit Tower. Have you ever heard of him? No. If you've studied at Drepung Losseling, you know him. I mean, even in some of the other great monasteries, most people know them. Most people know this great master. He's 92 now, and he's extensively taught. He has written books. An incredible master and practitioner. Well, he said when you read Lama Tsongkhapa's text, when you read through the entire text, and you know the other three commentators, you realize that Lama Tsongkhapa bases his interpretations of the Prasangika mainly on the writings of the three masters. Yeah, so it's really his writing, Illumination of the Intent, explaining, of course, Chandakirti's text, mainly bases his explanations on what? Of course, Chandrakirti said, obviously, but also Buddhapalita's text and Shantideva's 9th chapter of the Bodhisattva Chayatara in particular. All right. So, anyway, once this devotional section is complete, this is part of the devotional section. I just threw in the 3 charioteers. We talked about it last time and a question came up. Okay, now the text shifts from homage and promise to the philosophical explanation. And this starts once again, with the kind of preliminary called here a preamble, where the author lays out a structured plan for his commentary. All right, so the meaning of the title. Let's not ignore the title. It's not some catchy title. There's a reason for it. Then the translator's homage, just a few lines, that's quick. And then the actual text, the whole text. That's the 3rd section. And the concluding matters. It's actually just, how many verses? The concluding matters. That's like 4 verses, I think, of 330. So it's pretty short. Okay, so section number 3 is really long. But this kind of dividing things up in that way is a very organized approach, really, that reflects the influence of the logical tradition in Buddhism, the pramana system, that emphasizes that kind of clarity, precision, and well-structured kind of arguments. So how does he start? Then Lama Tsongkhapa starts by first carefully analyzing the term Madhyamika Vatara in Sanskrit, or Umalajuba in Tibetan, or entering the middle way in English. First he gives the Sanskrit title, and then the Tibetan, and it explains that here, when we say entering the middle way does not refer to emptiness. Usually it does, but here it specifically refers to Nagarjuna's main text on emptiness, which is called the Fundamental Wisdom. This is also, it's the proof of that, proof to a certain degree, like the scriptural support of that is given by Bhavaviveka, or he cites Bhavaviveka. Although he's a Svatantrika master, he's not a Prasangika person, still he was an incredible master and made a lot of good points in his texts. So even his final view is not accepted, but a lot of his explanations make perfectly sense. So he cites Bhavaviveka and he says, Bhavaviveka himself talked about what does middle way mean? It means free from the 2 extremes. So emptiness is free from the 2 extremes of reification and nihilism, and so is Nagarjuna's text. So we can call a text that describes emptiness in the correct way, we can call that middle way. And so that's how Chandrakirti, that's what Chandrakirti did. Middle way relates to Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. And then the next question is, how does Chandrakirti's text relate to Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom? Well, the title indicates this with the word entering. It enters the fundamental wisdom, which is, I said last time, it's a weird way. I mean, it's okay to enter emptiness, but to enter a text, it's a little weird, right? So another way to describe it would be to embark on explaining the fundamental wisdom. It enters the middle way, which is just another way of saying it embarks on explaining, right? It gets involved in, it engages in that particular text by explaining it. How does he explain it? By supplementing it. Why am I saying that? Why is Lama Tsongkhapa saying that? Not me. Why is Lama Tsongkhapa saying that? Why is that important? Because there are 2 types of commentaries, or more than that. I guess you could say more than that. There's a commentary which is a word-by-word commentary. Word by word. Okay? Now, for instance, fundamental wisdom, if you look at the text, very terse verses. It's easier in English, actually. It's much harder in Tibetan because it's a different language, different to ordinary colloquial Tibetan anyway, and the writing is terse. The meter is kept so that There's always an exact amount of syllables, which means sometimes you just have to leave out some grammatical prepositions and so forth, making it even harder. And then you have a word-for-word commentary. A word-for-word commentary is in most cases written in prose. And so it makes it so much easier. You use all the syllables and then you add explanations in between, right? And that's beautiful. In that way you get a full sense, oh, this is what it means. So Chandrakirti's text, in a certain way, no, actually Chandrakirti's text is not a word-for-word commentary. It does explain, but it doesn't go word by word. It doesn't go through it word by word. So instead of describing each and every verse, he basically explains, he summarizes the essence of these verses. Basically, he gives the meaning of these verses. And on top of that, he adds. He supplements it. He adds certain topics that Nagarjuna never mentioned. But does he supplement them, just kind of making them up, his own invention, and kind of like, oh, that sounds nice, I could just put... No, he uses Nagarjuna's writings. He uses other texts Nagarjuna has composed. Any other text that comes to mind by Nagarjuna that teaches in particular about method, about generosity, about bodhicitta, any other text that comes to mind? Letter to a friend. Yeah, it's more of advice. Yeah, letter to a friend. No, that's not mentioned here. Although there's no contradiction that maybe some aspects are in there as well. I don't know. But yeah, there's a specific text that probably most of you have heard if you studied the Dharma before. Precious garland. That's it. The precious garland. Yeah, very good. The precious garland. So very much based on Nagarjuna's precious Ratnavali, he then added certain ideas. And in a way, it's important because, well, if we know from the beginning that this is what Chandrakirti's text is all about, we're much more happy to study it. So, okay, we want to learn about fundamental wisdom, but that is so difficult. And so, it seems so dry at times, right? Again and again, the same kind of reasoning, but from different angles. So, you need to have strong determination to go through the whole text. To have it then explained in a slightly more condensed way, but have it supplemented with many other ideas that complete the path to enlightenment, well, that's beautiful, isn't it? We're much more likely to learn that because for our mind, it puts things into perspective. Compassion, love on one hand, and emptiness on the other. And how do the two connect? All right, so therefore it's really important to get a full sense and understand how the full sense of this text, and understand how he supplemented Chandrakirti, supplemented the fundamental wisdom, right? What he added to the fundamental wisdom. Now, last time we heard one person saying, for instance, just someone saying, oh, he probably supplemented the text with the conventional truth and the ultimate truth, with an extensive explanation of the conventional and the ultimate truth. And Lama Tsongkhapa says, well, conventional, fine. Yes, Chandrakirti explained a lot more about the conventional by talking about the fact that all phenomena are merely labeled. But the ultimate was very extensively explained in the fundamental wisdom, so that can't be right. Okay? But in general, yes, so Chandrakirti did supplement the fundamental wisdom through the profound aspect and the vast aspect. So in other words, Chandrakirti did add something to his text. He supplemented the fundamental wisdom by adding something that is part of the profound aspect, that is part of the view. But it wasn't emptiness. It wasn't emptiness. So he added something that is helpful for the reader, that is part of the wisdom aspect of the path, the profound aspect, but it just wasn't emptiness. So what was it? What was it? In a way, I've mentioned it before, but No, the conventional truth is not part of the profound aspect of the path, right? That's not part of the profound. So here it's part of emptiness. It belongs to the wisdom aspect, but it's not emptiness. And it's not the conventional truth, because the way the conventional truth is described in Chandrakirti's text is by way of, in particular, pointing out that all phenomena are merely labeled. Think, why is Chandrakirti called a Prasangika? I just want to have a precious garden. Oh, Banu said it. Was it before you? 4:33? I'm not sure. All right. It stopped working. All right. So, what did I say about Chandrakirti being a Prasangika charioteer? What did he do? What makes Chandrakirti so special? Why is he considered to be the Prasangika trailblazer? Exactly. He distinguished very clearly. He said, this is the Svatantrika, and that is not correct. That view in terms of emptiness is incorrect. So that is part of the profound, that is part of emptiness, refuting the Svatantrika. That's one thing he did. So let's go back to the text, the summary. I've completed the summary with this. So if we look at, I don't know the page numbers in my copy, Dependent Arising, Nishi said no. Well, that's part of the conventional truth. Dependent Arising is part of the conventional. But in my version, which is a Kindle version, it's page 42, the meaning of the title. And then it goes on to say, with respect to the varieties of reasoning for establishing suchness, for establishing emptiness, the fundamental wisdom is far more extensive than entering the middle way. All right, so in terms of describing the ultimate truth, it's far more extensive. So saying that Chandrakirti's entering the middle way supplemented the fundamental wisdom with the ultimate truth is not correct. So now what is our own position? This work enters the fundamental wisdom from the perspective of the profound aspect of the path and from the perspective of the vast aspect. So in relation to the first, what does the commentary say? The commentary here is the auto-commentary. In the very beginning, in one of the earlier classes, I mentioned that every time it says in capital letters, or in a capital letter, capital C, it refers to Chandrakirti's auto-commentary. So in there he says, this tradition is unique, so must the learned ones ascertain. What? All right. This tradition is unique, so must the learned ones ascertain. So what does this mean? This Prasangika tradition is unique. It's unique in the sense it's not the same as the Svatantrika. Both philosophical systems are called Madhyamika. Both deserve to be called Madhyamika. The Svatantrika is called the Madhyamika school. The Prasangika is a Madhyamika school. But the Prasangika is unique. In what way? Well, for instance, if you realize the view of the Prasangika, you can become liberated, you can become enlightened. Unfortunately, realizing the Svatantrika view doesn't take you that far. Okay? Doesn't take you that far. Because you have to find the middle that is totally free from reification and nihilism. And the Svatantrika, which extreme is it not totally free from? Pardon?
Absolutism.
No. Of the two, absolutism, yeah, reification, yeah, reification. Who said it? Yeah, reification, because it doesn't negate enough. It says like, okay, phenomena do exist from their own side, a little bit, right? I mean, it doesn't negate a lot, but it's still, there must be something from the side of the object.
What do you say you call that in English?
Reification, to reify, reification, to reify. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's called permanence. but it can be confused with permanent and impermanent, which is why, or absolutism, like something exists in an absolute way. That's the same as saying it exists from its own side, right? It's not relative, it's absolute. There must be some absolute aspect to everything that exists. While the Prasangika says, no, everything is relative. Everything is relative. It exists at the very least in relation to us labeling it. Okay. All right. So, therefore, when it says this tradition is unique, so that the learned ones, they must ascertain, they must understand that. That points out that Chandrakirti very clearly says this is the Prasangika school, this is the Svatantrika. Then he also says, not realizing this, they abandoned the profound teaching. Thus, to present without error the truth of the treatise, I have composed this work, Entering the Middle Way. This is Chandrakirti talking in his auto-commentary. He says, not realizing this, which means not realizing that what is taught in the fundamental wisdom cannot be interpreted according to the Chittamatra school, I've made this very clear. So that's the second point Chandrakirti makes, or the second reason why he supplemented the fundamental wisdom with a profound aspect. So first, he very clearly showed the unique philosophy of Prasangika versus Svatantrika. But he also explained that the fundamental wisdom cannot be explained in accordance with the mind-only school. Okay, so you'll see this in here. First, the two quotes are given in the illumination of the intent that I just read. And then underneath it, Lama Tsongkhapa says the following. Chandrakirti states, with what I just quoted, that he composed his Entering the Middle Way to show that the meaning of the treatise on the Middle Way, that the meaning of the fundamental wisdom, as established by him, as it was set forth by him, is distinctive compared to other Middle Way proponents. What are the other Middle Way proponents? Svatantrika. There's only one other Middle Way proponent, right? There are two Middle Way proponents. I said three, but no, I showed three, but
What
two.
about Shentonpa?
Shentongpa. Shentongpa is Prasangika. I mean, in the Tibetan tradition, it's a different way of explaining it, but that's part of Prasangika. I wouldn't call that Svatantrika. There's debate, of course, between those who accept it and who don't, but that's not the point. Yeah, I would say Shentongpa is part of they would definitely say they're part of the Prasangika school, right? Yeah. So, therefore, he says that what Chandrakirti does is he composed what Chandrakirti composed is Entering the Middle Way to distinguish it to other Middle Way proponents. So the others are Svatantrikas. And to strengthen the conviction that the meaning of the fundamental wisdom, the meaning of the treatise, or the meaning of the fundamental wisdom cannot be explained in conformity with the consciousness-only standpoint. Cannot be interpreted from the point of view of the mind-only school. Some may do that, but that's not correct. Okay, does that make sense? So he clearly explains, okay, fundamental wisdom is actually based on Prasangika, although it's not clear from the writing, but it actually refers to, it's page 33 of Eliminating the Intent, says Charlie. Is that 33? Oh yes, okay, great. So it's page 33. What's in my Kindle version 43, it's 33 in your text. Oh, you got 10 less pages, I don't know. All right, okay. So, therefore, he says, clearly distinguishes the two schools, the two Middle Way schools, as well as making clear or clarifying that fundamental wisdom cannot be interpreted from the point of view of the mind-only school. And this he will explain, of course. This is just an overview, what is to come. In his clear words too, Chandrakirti says that insofar as the nature of dependent designation is concerned, this should be understood from entering the middle way. Okay, so basically saying on top of distinguishing between the two middle way schools and explaining that the fundamental wisdom cannot be interpreted from the mind-only school point of view, he also explains that phenomena are merely labeled. Okay, which is actually the conventional truth. So it's actually part of the conventional truth. But I guess you're right. Some of you said conventional truth, and from just reading it, you're right. Yeah, you could actually make it part of here the profound aspect. Usually the profound refers to emptiness, but just from the way Lama Tsongkhapa puts it here, you could say here in this context it's part of the conventional. Can you still follow me? Yes? If it becomes too confusing, please let me know. I'm getting confused by what I say. Furthermore, the refutation of the consciousness-only standpoint is not extensive in either fundamental wisdom. Fundamental wisdom does not refute the mind-only school, the Chittamatra school, or clear words. Huh? Where does that come from? Clear words. What is that text? Who composed clear words? Chandrakirti. Aha. He composed Entering the Middle Way, and he composed another text, Clear Words. I haven't mentioned that, right? So what's the difference between his commentary, Clear Words, and this commentary?
One is word-to-word commentary.
One is a word-to-word commentary. So, finally we find out. That wasn't mentioned here before. But Chandrakirti composed two important commentaries. One was a word-for-word commentary called Clear Words. And this one is the one, Entering into the Middle Way. That is the commentary that's not a word-for-word, but it describes the meaning and it supplements it. So in that way, it's more important because word for word, well, there are others as well. How many word for word commentaries are there that are really famous? This is a trick question. Vishnaptikmatra. Well, you wouldn't know that. I don't think. It's not, well, in some specific texts it may be mentioned. I'm going to mention them now because that's in the beginning of our commentaries, the commentaries we use, it's mentioned. So I might as well say it. I hope I don't confuse you too much. I kept it until now because I thought this text and that text and three charioteers. It's a little confusing, but maybe once you have the transcripts, and you read it once again, it's not that complicated. It's just all the numbers are complicated. But let me say a little bit about these 8 texts. There are 8 word-for-word commentaries that were composed by different masters on the fundamental wisdom. 8. All right. I need to find my notes first. So, now the first one, it's a text called Akutubaya. Akutubaya, right? In English, Akutubaya. Kali Jingme in Tibetan, which means no fear from anywhere. No fear from anywhere. It's a beautiful title, right? I mean, you write a word-to-word word-for-word commentary on the fundamental wisdom called Don't Be Scared. It's all about emptiness, but don't be scared. No fear from anywhere. Right? Okay, so that was around the late 3rd or early 4th century. That's the oldest word-for-word commentary that was composed on fundamental wisdom. And some, in particular, a particular scholar called Avalokita Vrata. Oh, these names. Avalokita, like Avalokiteshvara, but Avalokita Vatra, Cherezi Kale Jingme in Tibetan. He's not significant only for his wrong view. He's mentioned in a lot of texts, but only for his one wrong view. Maybe for one or two more things, but usually not important. He said Nagarjuna composed this. This was an auto-commentary on the fundamental wisdom. That's mentioned in a lot of commentaries. So this first word-by-word commentary, that was composed by Nagarjuna himself. Yeah, it would make sense. Auto commentaries were composed. It was one of the earliest. But Lama Tsongkhapa says, no, no, no. And many, for instance, one Jonangama master I just read the other day, also said, no, no way, no way. It doesn't make sense. Do you want to know why? I'll tell you why. Because he gives a quote from Ayadeva, from his 400 verses. But at the time when auto commentaries were composed, it was just not tradition that you give a quote from your disciple's text. Right? If you're a disciple, not that, I mean, nowadays you would do that. A professor would quote a student, no problem. But it wasn't done at that time. It just wasn't done. Maybe it was done later on, but not at that time. So at that time, Nagarjuna being the teacher of Ayadeva, and in this text, Akutubaya, what does it quote? It gives a quote from Ayadeva's text. No way it was from Nagarjuna. He wouldn't quote his disciples' text. So therefore, it can't have been Nagarjuna. Okay, but it's still one of the earliest commentaries. 3rd or 4th century. But word commentary, word for word commentary, very important. Didn't add anything, not just didn't just comment on the meaning, but just explain every verse. Then there was Buddhapalitas, also a word for word commentary, 5th century.
This is the second.
That's the second. That's the second. Buddhapalita's commentary. All right. Then the third one is Bhavaviveka's commentary. Bhavaviveka. His commentary was called, okay, so Akutubaya, the commentary is also called Akutubaya because I only know the name of the author, Akutubaya. Buddhapalita's text is also called Buddhapalita. I wish that'd be so simple always, right? That the author and the name of the text, the name of the author and the name of the text would be the same. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But in the case of Akutubaya, well, his commentary is also called Akutubaya. Buddhapalita's commentary is also called Buddhapalita. But then you have Bhavaviveka, who composed the 3rd word-for-word commentary. What is this called? What is this commentary called? Many of you have heard this. I give you a hint. What is that? A lamp. Lamp off? Lamp off? Yeah, off is right. Of what? Not of the ceiling, but lamp of wisdom. Right? Lamp of wisdom. So he composed this 3rd commentary, but he introduced the Svatantrika in this text. He did not explain the fundamental wisdom from the point of view of the Prasangika middle way, but from the point of view of the Svatantrika middle way. Right? Here it splits. Okay. And he criticized in this text, Bhavaviveka, in this text, Lamp of Wisdom, he criticized Buddhapalita. He said, oh, you use these weird consequences, these weird logical absurdities. It doesn't work. You need to give reasons. A is B is because it's C. And not saying if you say A is not B, then it follows. He thought that technique or this method wasn't effective. We talked about last time why it is effective, but yeah, he didn't agree. And then came 2 commentaries we haven't even heard of. Gunamati's commentary and Shtiramati's commentary. Gunamati, Shtiramati. Now, maybe Shtiramati a little bit more known because, well, that commentary apparently is called Commentary on the Mahayana Madhyamika. And it survives in Chinese translation. It was translated by a Chinese master, and it survives in Chinese translation. But neither Gunamati's commentary survives in its original form, so only in fragments. Gunamati's has not survived. Shtiramati's has not survived in Sanskrit. About the other ones, I think also the first one didn't survive in Sanskrit. Akutobaya's didn't survive. Then is Chandrakirti's commentary, Clear Words, right? And then there's another one called Deva Sharman's commentary, Deva Sharman. And in Lama Tsongkhapa's, in one of Lama Tsongkhapa's commentaries called Essence of True Eloquence, he describes it as white manifestation, the name of the commentary. But again, survives only in fragments. And then there's an eighth one, that's Gunashri's commentary. Now these are mentioned. Okay, number one, Akutobaya, Buddhapalita's commentary, Baba Viveka's commentary, Gunamati's, Shtiramati's, Chandakirti's, Devasharman's, and Gunashri's. This is chronologically, that was their order. Only 4 were translated into Tibetan. Only 4. Which ones? Which ones do you think? Chandakirti's? Buddhapalita. Chandakirti's, of course. Baba Viveka's and Akutobaya. Akutobaya, that was also translated. We've never really heard of that, right? Akutobaya. Buddhapalita's we've heard, Chandakirti's we've heard, Baba Viveka's we heard. The other ones weren't translated into Tibetan. And so they didn't survive. Many of the original Sanskrit versions of the other texts also, or many, some didn't survive. Akutobaya didn't survive. But then you still have the Tibetan. In the case of the others, they're lost. But they were probably not considered important enough. And yeah, so as I said earlier, this whole debate of Akutobaya, Lama Tsongkhapa, in his own commentary on the fundamental wisdom and in his eloquence, essence of true eloquence, in both texts, he says Akutobaya was not composed by Nagarjuna. The reason was given before. Now, this is really boring to you. This is not absolutely important, but it's good to know. It's just some of the background information. And since we talked about word commentaries versus commentaries that convey the meaning of a text, well, it may be helpful. All right? It's just the beginning stuff. We'll enter the juicy part soon, which is more compassion and so forth. But yeah, this is just part of it. And since clear words was mentioned, I thought this is a good time, because clear words is a word-for-word commentary. And it's very easy to get confused. Clear words and auto-commentary. What is clear words based on? What is it a commentary of? Quick, say it. Huh? I can't hear. Fundamental wisdom. What is the auto-commentary by Kanta Chandakirti a commentary of? Entering the middle way. All right. Gets a little bit confusing. Clear word, auto-commentary, entering the middle way is a commentary of fundamental wisdom. Is it a word-for-word commentary? No. Is the Akutobaya a word-for-word commentary? Yes. Right. Is Buddhapalita's text a word-for-word commentary? Okay. How about Baba Viveka's Lamp of Wisdom? That too. Okay, great. So these are, how many of them are there all together? What are the other 4? Never mind. I've seen it so many times. Shtiramati, Gunamati, Devasharman, and there was another one, right? I forgot. Okay, never mind. You'll have it in the transcript if you're interested. I'm just mentioning it because our texts start with that as well. So I want to give you exactly what we studied, give you the same information. Okay, all right. So, furthermore, therefore, the refutation of the consciousness only. Banu asks, is there a difference between consciousness only or Vishnapti Matra and Chitta Matra? Is there a difference between the mind only and the consciousness only school? Sure? I'm just mean. You're absolutely right. There's no difference. So consciousness only, Vishnapti Matra. So is the Vishnapti Matra, which is consciousness only, the same as Chitta Matra? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. And then B writes, Nagarjuna wrote an auto-commentary to fundamental wisdom. No, not that I know, but some thought that the Akutobaya, Avalokitevatra, he thought that the Akutobaya, which was the first word-for-word commentary, which also chronologically was very close to Nagarjuna, thought that that was a text by Nagarjuna. But that was negated. And some earlier Tibetan masters accepted that view. They accepted that view, and later on it was refuted. Okay. All right. Anyway, so the refutation of the consciousness only or the mind only standpoint is not extensive in either the fundamental wisdom or in Chandrakirti's clear words, but it's extensive here. Therefore, ascertaining excellently the meaning of the fundamental wisdom and appreciating these two objectives, providing a unique interpretation of Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom compared to other commentators, and offering an extensive refutation of the consciousness-only standpoint on the basis of that treatise, these two together constitute one way in which this text enters the middle way. So he's basically saying, number one, there are two objectives of entering the middle way from the point of view of the vast aspect, to uniquely interpreting the fundamental wisdom from the point of view of the Prasangika school, as opposed to the Svatantrika, and refuting the mind-only standpoint, saying you can't interpret the fundamental wisdom from the point of view of the Chittamatra school. So he basically says, yeah, you can interpret it from the point of view of the Svatantrika school, but the Svatantrika school is not the highest school. But he says you cannot interpret it from the point of view of the mind-only school. Right? All right. And so in that way, he refutes both the Svatantrika and the mind-only school. Chandrakirti does. All right. In that way, he explains the fundamental wisdom by adding these two aspects. Then, from the perspective of the vast aspect, from the point of view of the vast aspect of the path, how does he supplement? What does he add to the fundamental wisdom? So here it says, in accordance with the tradition of the noble Nagarjuna, abiding in the two vehicles, Hinayana and Mahayana. So someone who follows the two vehicles. Here I want to be politically correct, but Hinayana and Mahayana is just easier said. It's just difficult to articulate saying the Theravada tradition, saying the Pali tradition, or the Sanskrit tradition, right? Which is also a way, that would be the politically correct way of talking about these two traditions. The Theravada or the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, right? Hinayana, Mahayana. But here, Geshe-Thupten Jinpa chose a word that's just easier, that's shorter. So, but basically, whether we talk about the Pali tradition, the Hinayana tradition, or the Mahayana tradition, in both cases, if you want to become liberated or enlightened, you need to realize emptiness. You need to realize emptiness. Okay. Therefore, the difference between these two schools, you don't distinguish between Hinayana and Mahayana from the point of view of emptiness. Right? If you talk about emptiness, you need that to become self-liberated, you need that to become enlightened. Okay. So therefore, the two schools are not distinguished based on whether one possesses wisdom realizing the utterly profound truth of suchness. So whether you want to become merely liberated or enlightened, that distinction is not made on the basis of what you realize when it comes to emptiness. Furthermore, although no distinctive features of the vast path of the Mahayana, besides the dimension of the profound, are presented in the fundamental wisdom, that work was composed from the Mahayana standpoint, within the division of Mahayana and Hinayana. So, he didn't talk about bodhicitta. Nagarjuna didn't talk about bodhicitta. He didn't talk about generosity. He didn't talk about the paramita of generosity. He didn't talk about great compassion. So states of mind that are typical for the Mahayana. Great compassion, bodhicitta, the 6 paramitas. And still, it's very clear that the fundamental wisdom is part of the Mahayana. Why? Why? Anyone who's read this bit before? It's explained in the next sentence. Why? Why? Because the extensive presentation of the selflessness of phenomena by a profuse variety of reasoning is done only in the Mahayana training. And this is how the presentation is made in fundamental wisdom. The fundamental wisdom doesn't talk about bodhicitta, doesn't talk about great compassion, which would be an indication that it's a Mahayana text. And still we know it's a Mahayana text because it describes selflessness, in particular the selflessness of all phenomena, extensively. Does that mean a Hinayana text doesn't explain it to the same extent? No, doesn't. Why not? I give you a hint. It's not necessary. Why not? Why is in the Mahayana text, why is emptiness described extensively? Has to be described extensively, but not in a Hinayana text. In a Hinayana text, even if it's not described as extensively, it's fine. You don't need that extensive description. Why is that?
Because one is concerning the self-liberation, so they have to realize the selflessness.
Because, yeah, you said the field is said exactly the same. Hinayana is for self-liberation only. Yeah, but still, lots of different reasonings for emptiness help us to understand better, right? Or not? Why in a Mahayana text do you need so many different reasonings? Yes? Okay, so the emptiness of phenomena, okay, that is also the emptiness of phenomena, although part of the Hinayana, it's not described, it's not stressed that much. More the selflessness of person is more stressed, is more emphasized. But even though why does it need to be extensively described? It's described in the Hinayana as well, but just briefly. In the Mahayana, extensively. I give you one hint. Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva.
Bodhisattva needs a lot of skillful means to teach all sentient beings.
A bodhisattva needs lots of skillful means to teach other sentient beings. So bodhisattvas, in order to become a Buddha, they have to accumulate so much merit to extensively teach others, right? Extensively guide other sentient beings already as part of their training to become a Buddha. Whereas if you're self-liberated, you may do that, but it's not necessary in order to become self-liberated. I'm not saying they're not incredible practitioners who aim for self-liberation. They don't do that, but it's not absolutely necessary to reach your goal. But to reach the goal of Buddhahood, what you understand is one thing, right? So you understand emptiness, a few reasonings, and you understand it. I mean, I make it sound simpler than it is, but this extensive knowledge helps you to guide others, even already when you're on the path of a bodhisattva. Does that make sense? So that's why it's not for yourself, but for the benefit of others. You can benefit others more effectively by teaching them, by reaching out and teaching emptiness to them. And that's why a Mahayana text always teaches, and what she said was correct. She did say, she mentioned the emptiness of phenomena. That is stressed a lot more in Mahayana texts, but the emphasis on extensively, right? Okay, great. So the commentary, the self-comment or auto-commentary makes this point very clearly. So here Chandrakirti says in his auto-commentary that it presents Mahayana as indeed correct, for it does so to elucidate the selflessness of phenomena. And the intention of Nagarjuna is to explain such selflessness in an extensive manner. In the Shravaka vehicle, the selflessness of phenomena is confined only to brief illustrations. Right? Okay. All right. Then it says, I will explore this point further in another section. So we'll get more into this later. Okay. Thus, the path presented in Nagarjuna's text should ideally be complemented with the other dimensions of the Mahayana path, as found in other instructions of the noble Nagarjuna. So bring it together. Precious Garland, the Compendium of Sutra, for instance. So Nagarjuna composed a lot of texts which beautifully describe bodhicitta, great compassion, but just not in the fundamental wisdom. Now Chandrakirti brings the two together, mainly focusing on the fundamental wisdom. How do we know that the main topic is emptiness? How do we know? Think of how many verses has chapter 6? 70% of all the other verses, 68% of all the other verses, of 330 verses. The 6th chapter has 226. So the text mainly pays attention to emptiness, but it does add the other topics as well for the sake of bringing the two together. All right, so if you're interested in emptiness, wait until we get to the 6th. And the others are quite short. The other chapters are quite short. Some chapters only have 1 or 2 verses. The first has 17, so it's really not that much in comparison. All right. So, therefore, my Chandrakirti supplements the fundamental wisdom with the other writings that are more part of the Mahayana, such as compassion and so forth, based on the instructions of the noble Nagarjuna. For this reason, Chandrakirti presents these supplements in his work. Okay, so now the supplements are mentioned. The 3 factors of the ground of ordinary beings. The 3 factors of the ground of ordinary beings. These are 3 types of minds that can arise in the continuum of an ordinary being. Ordinary, not like non-spiritual, kind of totally ordinary. Here, ordinary means like someone who's not realized emptiness directly yet. Right? That's called an ordinary being here. So someone who's not an Arya yet. But an ordinary being who's not that highly advanced on the path, and maybe even hasn't entered the path yet. There are 3 types of minds. Great compassion, bodhicitta, and realizing emptiness conceptually. Compassion, bodhicitta, and realizing emptiness conceptually. Right? So these are described. These are the 3 factors. We very soon come to these 3. The 3 factors. Bodhicitta, the mind that realizes emptiness conceptually, and great compassion. Exactly. All right. These are explained by Chandrakirti. These have been added. Then the 10 grounds of the Arya Bodhisattvas on the learner stage. The 10 grounds of Arya Bodhisattva. So 10 grounds, he describes these 10, the 6 paramitas and the 4 paramitas. We'll go through all of them. The resultant ground, Buddhahood. Talks about Buddhahood. And now this is a little bit difficult to understand, on the basis of explaining the sequence of the 5th and 6th grounds. So 10 Bodhisattva grounds, 10 Bodhisattva levels, that are describing the 10 paramitas. Okay. What is paramita number 5? What is the perfection number 5? Concentration. What is the 6th ground? The 5th ground, therefore, it mainly deals with the paramita of concentration. What does the 6th ground mainly deal with? The paramita of wisdom. Okay, so on the basis of explaining the sequence of the 5th and the 6th ground, what is the sequence? Concentration first, wisdom next. What is on that basis, what is explained is the cultivation of penetrative insight into emptiness is grounded in tranquil abiding. To have penetrative insight into emptiness, to understand, to really realize emptiness directly, to have a direct experience of emptiness, what do you need? Calm abiding. You need an incredible concentrated mind. That needs to be specified. In the fundamental wisdom, it doesn't talk about this method. We need to understand, if we want to understand emptiness in the best way, unfortunately, we need calm abiding. We need an incredible deep state of concentration. What does that mean? For at least 4 hours, you're able to totally focus on one object with great intensity and clarity. Who can do 4 minutes? Who can do 4 seconds? I'll be fine, someone with 4 seconds. So right now, we totally lack concentration. Yeah. So 4 seconds, it's good. With great intensity and clarity. 4 seconds is great. Remember in the very beginning, we talked about things like this as part of our analytical meditation to elicit an emotional response. Briefly spoke about that in our first lesson. And then the question was, how long does that emotional response stay with us? So maybe the idea for a few minutes? No, a few seconds and you're doing well. We start our practice with that. Everything is a few seconds. Generate bodhicitta. How long does it last? Right? We generated it together and we possibly had a few moments of, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to become a Buddha for all these sentient beings. Right? But it doesn't last. Those few seconds are really important. Let's not underestimate it. And if after a few years you add an extra second, that's huge. No. A little bit more would be great. I mean, still, it's something to rejoice. I mean, something to be happy about. Hopefully it'll be a little longer, but still, that's already progress. So our progress doesn't need to be huge, especially not in the beginning, right? And here, likewise, of course, right now we don't have that kind of concentration, but we need to be aware that this is essential. Without it, we won't be able to realize emptiness directly. So as part of explaining the 5th and the 6th ground, or in other words, as part of learning about this 5th and 6th chapter of Chandrakirti's text, we learn that the cultivation of penetrative insight into emptiness, direct realization, is grounded in tranquil abiding, in calm abiding, which is the essence of the meditative absorption, the direct meditative equipoise, probing or realizing the suchness of the true selflessness. Right? Okay. Therefore, this is all you study. And I went through, for instance, Panchen Sontarpa's commentary. We usually study as part of the IBD, which is also the same at Drepung Losang Ling and Ganden Shatse. We study a text by someone called Panchen Losang Trapa. In other monasteries, it may be Jetsun Chögyal Gyaltsen, or it may be Jamyang Shepa, but these are very similar. They're not very similar in their explanations. They're very helpful. They're very helpful to debate, and they give beautiful explanations. So usually there are two volumes. There's one that gives a general explanation. It's called the general meaning. And then there's one that's called decisive analysis, where, in this case, Panchen Sontarpa, in the general meaning, he just generally explains, gives us some extra explanation that we couldn't find in illuminating the intent, or that we can't find in there. And in the decisive analysis, he just analyzes, he analyzes different aspects, presents some debate. So here in the general meaning, Panchen Sontarpa said, for instance, where does it say anything about these 3 minds? Bodhicitta, great compassion, and the mind realizing emptiness. Where does it mention that? In the continuum of an ordinary being. And it mentions it in the Precious Garland. So he actually gives the quote. So if you read the Precious Garland, it's verse 174 and 175. So I searched for it. I mean, it didn't give the verse numbers, but it was easy to find then. And the words are, if you and the world wish to attain unsurpassable enlightenment, its roots are the mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta, as unwavering as the king of mountains, compassion extending throughout the limitless directions, and wisdom that does not rely on the two extremes. Right? These 3 we need. The wisdom that does not rely on the 2 extremes, or that does not fall into the 2 extremes, if you like. All right, so you need those 3. Now, Chandrakirti explains them extensively, or they will be explained extensively soon. Lama Tsongkhapa explains them even further. But they were mentioned in this text, Precious Garland, beautiful text, in verse 174 and 175. All right. So there's that. And then he says, well, where does entering the middle way describe these three? Well, pretty easy. Verse 1 until verse 3 and verse 4, the first 2 lines. So in other words, 3.5 verses. In 3.5 verses, the first 3.5 verses, in that he describes these 3 factors. All right. So that's the first. And then the 10 grounds. Well, from verse 4, the last 2 lines onwards, all the way to chapter 11, verse 9. Okay, so chapter 1 from verse 4 onwards, chapter 1 from verse 4 onwards describes the first ground, and then each chapter describes a respective ground all the way until the 10th chapter, and then 11, it summarizes them, and that's it. You're done with the different grounds. Then comes a description of the Buddha. Well, since we're talking about the paramitas and what a bodhisattva means, we at least want to know what a Buddha means. So the Buddha is explained. And then there's basically another verse saying, well, all this is taken from Nagarjuna. Great. 1 or 2 verses. Dedication done. So in a way, this was a summary of the entire text. Right? So by saying, okay, you're going to have an explanation of the vast, and you have of the profound and of the vast. In that way, we also get a sense of what to expect. Okay. So therefore, when contemplating the meaning of the fundamental wisdom, he must do so by bringing to mind those aforementioned points taught in entering the middle way. So to understand the fundamental wisdom better, having supplemented them in the way just described, we understand the fundamental wisdom better because it puts things into perspective. Otherwise, the 2 aims of composing entering the middle way will have been lost. So to understand both the vast aspect and the profound aspect. The second manner of entering the middle way by way of this text then is entering the path of fundamental wisdom from the perspective of the vast aspect of the path. Done. All right, so we went through the first part. We do debate that a little bit. You know, what does it mean, entering? In what way do you enter? But that's it. Basically, that's it in terms of what does entering the middle way mean, actually. Now, when you hear entering into the middle way, you understand it means actually to embark on explaining the fundamental wisdom by supplementing it in 2 ways. From the point of view of the profound, from the point of view of the vast. All right. Okay, now we start with the text. So that was just the title. And next follows the homage by the translators. All right, I won't spend much time on this. So he says, I pay homage to the gentle Lord Manjushri. That's what Chandrakirti says. So previously we had Lama Tsongkhapa's homage. Now we have Chandrakirti's homage. She's saying, I pay homage to Manjushri. The meaning of these words is easy to understand. Lama Tsongkhapa says, right? We agree. Okay. Given that this text presents the ultimate Abhidharma, here ultimate Abhidharma means wisdom, highest wisdom, right? Abhidharma here means the ultimate wisdom, the highest wisdom, and because it principally pertains to the training in wisdom, here the translator pays homage to Manjushri in accord with the time-honored decree. Now, the footnote here is great. What is this saying, this decree? Why Manjushri? Well, this is in reference to a royal decree in Tibet that was proclaimed during the 8th century in Tibet, whereby to help immediately identify which of the 3 baskets, which of the 3 kind of scriptural collections, whether discipline, discourses, or higher knowledge, a given text might belong to, different objects of homage were to be chosen by the translators. In the case of a Vinaya text, the omniscient one is chosen as the object of homage. So when you take a Vinaya text from the original Sanskrit, if you, in Tibet, you remember the time when Buddhism came to Tibet in the 8th century, well, it wasn't enough to bring Shantarakshita to Tibet and ordain the first monks and all that. You had to now translate everything. Everything had to be translated into Tibetan. Oh, it took many, many hundreds of years. with translations and then retranslating them and checking the translations and so forth. Now, you had all these Lotsawas or translators, and when they started a translation, they added an homage. And from the words of the homage, in other words, depending on what it was directed at, you knew what the main topic was. So if it was directed at the Omniscient One, if it literally said, I pay homage to the Omniscient One, it was a Vinaya text, a text on discipline. Because the Vinaya, which is mainly for monks and nuns, but also for lay practitioners who've taken certain lay vows, very intricate and complicated. Very complicated and intricate. So my teacher used to say, well, you have to be omniscient to really understand it. So therefore, it is directed at the Omniscient One, right? I mean, exaggerating, of course, you can understand it even though you're not omniscient, but it's really complicated. Many different cases, like scenarios are described, how to behave in certain situations and so forth. Kind of gives you a code of conduct, how to keep your vows and what vows there are, etc. And then the next, a text pertaining to sutra, so the training in concentration. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, well, as Buddhas have concentration, Bodhisattvas need to train, and since it's here from the point of view of the Mahayana, well, we talk about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And finally, for an Abhidharma text in higher knowledge, higher wisdom and higher knowledge, homage is to be paid to Manjushri. Why? Because the three baskets in turn correlate to three higher trainings: training in morality, Vinaya, training in concentration, the Sutra collection, and training in wisdom for the Abhidharma collection. Right? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So in that way we know why here, okay, homage to Gentle Lord Manjushri. We already knew kind of it's going to be wisdom, but now it's confirmed. It's wisdom. All right. Now the treatise itself. We start with the actual text, which has 4 sections. Again, salutation, homage, this time by Chandrakirti. A means of entering into the task of composing the treatise. So when you start composing a text, you pay homage, right? You start off with that, kind of remembering your teacher, remembering the masters, reconnecting to why you're doing this. Then the actual body of the treatise. And it also talks about the manner in which the treatise was composed and dedicating the merits of having composed the treatise. That's it. Those are the 4 outlines. All right. A means of entering into the task of composing the treatise. This is twofold. Praising great compassion. Great, finally we got it. Great compassion. So we start finally with great compassion. But here, great compassion without differentiating its characteristics, which is just a complicated way of saying just great compassion in general, without classifying it in different types. Yeah. So in Tibetan, he literally translates it saying praising great compassion in general. It literally says without differentiating its characteristics. So you have this type of compassion and that type of compassion. In that way, you have different categories. No, just talking about it in general. And next then is paying homage to great compassion by differentiating its characteristics. Okay. All right. Now, maybe we can have some questions now, but I want to summarize quickly what I said today. I think summaries are important, just to not lose sight of what we talked about. I gave you already a summary, so no need to summarize the summary. Getting to the point of course, entering the middle way. It enters the middle way, entering the middle way being called so, because it enters into the fundamental wisdom by way of the profound, from the point of view of the profound. So not only does it describe emptiness, but it also distinguishes the Prasangika's view, that is taken here as the main view, from the very similar Svatantrika view. All right. And it indicates that the fundamental wisdom cannot be interpreted from the point of view of the mind-only school, and in that way also refutes the mind-only school. Besides that, it describes how phenomena as they lack inherent existence. How do they exist? It extensively explains that they're merely labeled. So that's what Chandrakirti adds to his text. Then from the point of view of the vast, the method part of the path, or the vast path, he adds the explanation of 3 important minds that we need to generate in order to enter the Mayana path: great compassion, bodhicitta, and the mind that realizes emptiness. So to enter the Mayana path and proceed on the Mayana path, you need these 3. So these 3 will be explained. You need the 10 paramitas. You need the unique practice. So the 10 paramitas is just another way of saying the unique practices of a bodhisattva. Once you've realized emptiness directly, the unique practices. That you need to understand. You need to also understand, what else was it? Oh, what is the result? What does Buddhahood mean? That needs to be explained, which Chandrakirti also adds. And very important to stress, in order to have deep insight into emptiness, unfortunately, we need calm abiding. I'm saying unfortunately because at this day and age, distraction is a huge problem, and it's so much harder to develop calm abiding. It's not impossible, but just more difficult. And that is also explained. So these are the main aspects that Chandrakirti adds to his explanation of emptiness. It's not that difficult, right? It's a little weird, the language, we don't ordinarily talk in that way. It's a little bit, that's just, summaries are always a little difficult. I mean, like, the beginning is really like a summary. This is what to expect. And right now, once we've studied it, it becomes clear what was meant with this. But right now, it's difficult to get a real image of what to expect. Then, having completed that explanation, the translator's homage started by paying homage to Manjushri. Now we know why. Because of the 3 main topics, ethical conduct or moral conduct, calm, concentration, and wisdom. Here, the focus is on wisdom. Okay, indicated by the fact that the author, Chandrakirti, pays homage to... No, not the author, sorry. The translators. The translators. So Nakso Lobsawa. Lobsawa means translator. Nakso was the name. He was a translator of Dipamkara Atisha, who came to Tibet. So Nakso Lobsawa, as far as I remember, was one of his translators, or maybe his main translator. He first translated Entering the Middle Way, and then a later translator called Patsap Lobsawa kind of redid it. Which is good, right? You need to redo certain translations. The first version needs some correction, and so Patsap Lobsawa is known for having translated the version we use now. Okay, so these were the Lobsawas, and they pay homage to Manjushri. And of course, Patsap Lobsawa and Nakso and Patsap Lobsawa, they didn't work on their own. I mean, they had others to help them. Their names are given, but usually there's a teamwork and people check the translations. At least that was the case in Tibet. Okay, so that's the part of the homage, and then the treatise itself. And it starts off with basically the homage now by Chandrakirti, praising compassion. And that's what we start with next time. We start with the actual text, with the first verse of the actual text. So we took 3 classes to get the preliminaries out of the way. Not too bad. It could have been longer. Yeah, so we finally start the text. Now we've got some time for questions. Yes. So Banu writes, because when you become a Buddha, you need to know the different ways of negating the self, so as to be able to help all sentient beings. Yes, what Banu says is totally right. But a Buddha, being omniscient, of course, knows that. But in preparation for that, as a Bodhisattva, we already train in that way, but more in order to accumulate merit, enough merit to attain this omniscient mind. It's not like, and my teachers used to stress that, if a Buddha is omniscient, a Bodhisattva has to just gain more knowledge. It's not like that. Does that make sense? A Buddha is omniscient. The Buddha knows everything. So logically, we may think, okay, so a Buddha knows exactly how many times of worms there are. So does a bodhisattva have to memorize all the different types of worms there are to get closer? That's not how it works. Right? To us, ordinarily, to know everything, you need to accumulate that knowledge. It doesn't work that way. Why not? Why not? Why does a bodhisattva not have to accumulate more knowledge in order to be then all-knowing? In everyday life, that would make sense, wouldn't it? You have to say, I mean, in order to know all the types of butterflies there are in India, you have to memorize each one of them. So wouldn't it make sense that a bodhisattva has to memorize all this information, and then once the bodhisattva becomes a Buddha, then he or she is omniscient? Does it work that way? No. Please, can anyone explain me why not?
Because I feel the Buddha's omniscient mind.
Okay, go ahead. Venerable.
Because the mind is not ready yet to remember all of it. The mind is not vast enough yet.
The mind is not ready, it's not vast enough to remember all this. So even if you were to try and memorize all that, it's just not going to happen. Okay, that's a good point. Yes, what did you want to say?
I'm going the other way around. If Buddha's mind is omniscient,
Yes.
then it reflects everyone's karma. So it reflects every single being's predisposition, and from an omniscient mind, the Buddha can teach regardless whether it is learned or
You're absolutely right. So a Buddha knows everything, therefore knows everyone's karma. But wouldn't the Bodhisattva have to memorize first everyone's karma? Wouldn't have to get to know everyone's karma. First, every person, in order to get to that knowledge. Why not? Why not?
This is a part of elimination instead of accumulation.
It's a part of elimination. It's the path of elimination instead of accumulating. So what Venerable is saying, okay, so becoming a Buddha is it's not about adding, it's about removing. It's about eliminating. Right? So we have a sense, when you have all that knowledge, you need to add to gain that knowledge. But as Kushala is saying, as Venerable says, no, it's all about getting rid of stuff. What do we have to get rid of? Eliminating. Go ahead. Wrong views, yes. The afflictions, what did he say? The cognitive obscurations. The cognitive obscurations. So the obscurations in our mind that obstruct us from knowing everything. So knowing everything is not achieved by just adding more knowledge. It's by removing that which is obstructing our mind right now from knowing everything. In other words, what's implied by that? We have the potential to know everything. Our mind is in that nature to know things, right? It does that automatically. It knows something at the very least. So when we look around, we know the things in this object. So what is it that knows? It's our mind. It's our eye consciousness, for instance. That shows our mind such as our eye consciousness, which is one type of mind, can do that. It can know things. But it's obstructed from knowing everything. There's something in the way. And that is what we need to remove. What is it that we need to remove? The afflictions. All the different afflictions, our wrong views, they keep us from knowing. Actually, it makes sense if I give you this simple example. So you have to then extend it. But from the point of view, think for instance, our wrong view, our misperception of reality, holding on to an inherently existent I, right? It makes us perceive a very solid and inherent concrete I. Do you agree? I all day long. Every now and then that mind pops up with perceiving an inherently existent I, which leads to self-centeredness. The more self-centered we are, the less we can see what's going on around us. It's just me. I'm no longer perceptive when it comes to others' issues. I'm no longer perceptive. I no longer perceive what's going on around me. So this shows our mind gets very restricted by obsession with I, me, and mine. We may interpret everything in relation. Oh, they're talking. They're probably talking about me. Oh, they're smiling. Oh, they probably think I'm great. Oh, Someone is praising someone, they probably mean me, right? The more self-obsessed we are, the more we misinterpret everything around us. We just don't have the space in the mind to see things for what they are. So that simple fact, that is just a very coarse way of looking at it, can also explain that because we have this misperception, because we have these afflictions that naturally arise from that, it's impossible to have the space of mind to see things for what they are. So the afflictions are in the way, and the imprints, as was said, the cognitive obscurations. So our mind, every time an affliction arises, it leaves a stain on the mind. It leaves something on the mind that further hinders us from knowing everything. So as Venerable said, when we work towards Buddhahood, it's not so much about adding more. It's removing what's extra. It's removing what's in the way. All right, so now, therefore, becoming omniscient, yeah, it's not about adding more and more. All right, so let's take a question, first of all, from you guys. Any question? Yes, please. Can you speak up, please? Sorry, I can't hear. Yes, clarification, sure. Yes, 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 yes. All right. So her question is, if I understand it right, I'll repeat it just for those following online. Her question is, so it says here that the fundamental wisdom can be interpreted from the point of view of the Svatantrika and the Prasangika. But Lama Tsongkhapa says very clearly, it cannot be interpreted from the point of view of the mind only. Okay, I agree. And then as to the first part of her question, it can be interpreted from the point of view of the Svatantrika and the Prasangika. How do we know which one is the right one? How do we know? What do we apply? Reasoning. Reasoning. We have the tool of reasoning. But to tell you the truth, it takes time. Because when we get to know the Svatantrika, I'm pretty sure, I definitely feel that way. It's like, that makes sense. Don't negate too much. I want a little bit left, right? But it's helpful to learn about this school. And then at some point, whenever that's going to be, we be ready to say the Svatantrika. And there's some things they say, we always end up not being able to answer, right? If there's something inherent within the vase that makes it a vase, what is that? Can't find it. That's our problem. The Svatantrika school says, yeah, there's something from the side of a pot or a table, for instance, that makes it a table. But then when asking, what is that? Huh? No one can answer it. What is it? What is it in the table that distinguishes it from every non-table, that goes beyond being just called a table? All this we'll spend some time analyzing. And then see in the very end, which of the two actually explains everything and which one is really difficult to answer. But from our depth, like from our deep feeling inside, I don't even think I'm Svatantrika. I don't even qualify to be Vaibhashika. Right? I believe in this objective world out there. And so now I'm trying to apply these reasonings and hopefully affect the way I see the world. But it's really difficult. It takes time again and again and again. And like even having done this for 35 years, this is nothing. Sorry. This is terrible at a time and age when there's fast food and, faster and faster internet. Unfortunately, there's no way in which we can fasten this process. But the good thing is if we just do it, a second is added to a second, to a second, to a second, right? Yeah. But to answer your question, well, we apply reasoning. So let's see. Okay, I'll take one question from here. Okay, so Banu says, the Sanskrit text starts with Namo Bhagavate Buddhaya, or about a Bhagavan Buddha, whereas in the Tibetan translation it starts with a salutation to Manjushri. Why is that the case? Interesting. He even sent the Sanskrit, as if I could read that. No, sorry, I can't read the Sanskrit, but I believe that's what it says. I don't know. No, wait. The Sanskrit starts with Namo Bhagavate Buddhaya, but not, here we're talking about the Tibetan translators. So the Tibetan translators who translated the original Sanskrit text to Tibetan, they added their own. So the verse of... Yeah, the Tibetan translators. So the translator's homage, saying, I pay homage to the gentle Lord Manjushri, that was added by the translator. That is not yet Chandrakirti saying anything. But the question remains, Banu's question remains, why does it say in the original Sanskrit about to Bhagavan Buddha, when in the text here, it pays homage to compassion and not to Bhagavan Buddha? So maybe there are different Sanskrit versions. I mean, it's not surprising. We have different versions of this text and that text even nowadays. So it's possible that Chandrakirti's version, how was it passed on? It was copied, right? They didn't have printing presses. I don't think at the time of Chandrakirti. Not sure. But anyway, it was, no, I think it was handwritten. And maybe that just was dropped out in one version and in another version it's still there. I don't know. I really can't answer that. So, but I know at least in the Tibetan, there are also sometimes different versions. All right. I hope that answered that a little bit. And so Banu adds, every other verse, the ones on compassion, are still there in the Sanskrit. All right, so in the original Sanskrit version that he found, I wonder whether that's complete or not, but what he found, it does have, oh great, to have someone just read Sanskrit, that's good to know. So in his version here, in this version here, yeah, everything else seems to be the same. It starts with compassion and so forth, but there's this extra one where it says, I pay homage to the Bhagavan Buddha. Interesting. Okay, let's remember that. Another question here.
Should I have a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Because, like, if I can quote Bipam, because he's
Yes.
saying, Swatantrika,
Mhm.
he's saying we agree with Prasangika in
Mhm.
terms of ultimate reality,
Mhm.
there is nothing real fiction there.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to conventional truth, we have to say something exists objectively. But ultimately, nothing exists. So we are not debating the ultimate truth, we are just debating the conventional truth.
Okay, so you're quoting Jumipam.
Not exactly quote, but this is how I
Quoting means, of course, just explaining Jumipam. I hope I say it correctly. So from the point of view of the ultimate truth, there's no difference between Prasangika and Svatantrika, but from the point of view of the conventional, there you need to distinguish between the two. It's a slightly different approach. And I haven't studied it in any, I studied it a little bit as part of the study at the IBD. We studied a little bit about the Nyingma, the Kagyu, and the Sakya tradition, but my knowledge, that little tiny thing I understood, doesn't allow me to answer this question. One thing I want to say about the other traditions, the little that I studied, I realized that actually they're saying the same thing, but the words are sometimes used differently. Now, this is not an example of that, what you just said. But it'll come up later when I mention again something I learned in the Kagyu tradition, for instance, and I don't want to go into it. I remember getting a lesson on this, and I thought, oh, I've got something to debate now. We had studied at Cherubling, and I would go to the debate ground where the monks from Cherubling also debated, and I was like, now I can prove that that's wrong what they're saying. So I debated, and when we debated, in the end, we realized we accepted the same. The words were just used a little differently. So in the end, I was like, oops, they do say the same. It's just expressed in a slightly different way, right? So therefore, I didn't see that huge difference. Now, I can't really answer the question you just asked because I don't know enough about what Jumipam said in this particular context. So I can't answer it, unfortunately. So maybe someone else can and can put it in the discussion group. That would definitely be helpful. I'm most familiar with what Amatsukapa says. Of course, there are differences in the different traditions, Sakya, Kagyu, Nyingma, Gelug, when it comes to Tantra. But those are just different techniques. That's not the philosophy. Yeah? And still there may be other differences that are not just words, but I don't think there are that are great enough that you cannot attain enlightenment using the techniques of any of these traditions. All of them take you equally to enlightenment. It just depends on our karmic connections, yeah, with the different systems, the different traditions, yeah. But unfortunately, I don't know. In other words, in answer to your question, I don't know. Simply saying it. Okay, I'll take one more from the group. Linda Lim is saying, I do understand that those on the Bodhisattva path need lots of reasoning for analyzing wisdom in order to have skillful means to help beings. In the Hinayana, breaking the first 3 factors will enable one to attain Sotapan and will not fall to lower realms. What is Sotapan? Pardon?
Stream enter.
Stream enter. Okay, to enter the path of a stream enter. Will enable one to attain Sotapan and will not fall to lower realms. So does it mean that if those on the Bodhisattva path realize the same 3 factors, then they too are on safe ground? The first 3 factors. What are the first 3 factors? Do you know that? I don't know enough about the Theravadan tradition. Sorry, it's my failing, really. Oh, these 3 factors. Oh. But in the Hinayana, they don't mention great compassion and bodhicitta.
The 5 factors.
The third factor is realizing selflessness. Okay. Breaking the first 3 factors. So if the 3 factors are the ones here, we'll talk more about great compassion. What is the difference between compassion in the Hinayana and in the Mahayana? Right? I mean, don't misunderstand me. In the Hinayana, they have incredible compassion. But there's one specific reason why the type of compassion described here, you just don't need in the Hinayana. Maybe some have it, but it's not necessary. Some have developed it, but it's not necessary. But yeah, so I don't know. Breaking the first 3 factors, if those are the 3 here, I'm just wondering, bodhicitta? That couldn't be one of them. And so I don't know which other factors they are. The third factor is realizing selflessness. Well, in the Mahayana system, once you realize emptiness directly, or even realizing it conceptually on the path of preparation, at some point you can no longer be reborn in the lower realms. That is before you enter what in the Hinayana is called entering the path of a stream enterer. Although that vocabulary is not used for the Mahayana path really, but if you were to use it, even before entering the path of a stream enterer, the doors are closed because of your profound understanding of emptiness. Okay, all right. Further questions here? No? Is there someone writing? No? Okay. We've got, oh yes. Oh yeah, no. Oh, it's just a thank you. You're welcome. All right, so, yes, please?
Yeah. You said the 3 minds, bodhicitta, great compassion, and emptiness. You need to have these 3 minds to enter the Mahayana path.
Wait. Yes, that comes. Okay, that comes later. I was hoping no one asked that question. It'll be answered. It'll be answered, yes. Yes, so his question was, I said that bodhicitta, great compassion, the mind realizing emptiness, you need that in order to enter the Mahayana path. Huh? Yeah. Yes, there's something that has to be explained here. His question was that, but I didn't want to explain it yet. So you need those 3 first in order to Mahayana path. Not literally, there's something else that needs to be added. Right? I'll explain it next time. Okay. Oh, Banu's last question. Why don't the Buddhas have a karmic connection with all sentient beings? If all sentient beings have been one's kin since beginningless time? Good question. Good question. Right? Since beginningless time. But what happens with that karmic connections if it's eons ago?
It
It what? It grows. Pardon? It to some sentient beings, actually, well, it weakens, doesn't it? I mean, with some sentient beings, like let's not just think of the sentient beings in this world, endless worlds. And so it does weaken. It is true that they've all been really, really close to us, but that may have been trillions and millions of eons ago. I mean, think that we've existed since beginning this time. And so some of these connections have weakened, and some are becoming stronger, some are stronger. So it's not like we've equally, then otherwise, if that were true, we would have equally strong connections with everyone. But we know, even in this lifetime, we start off having a best friend in kindergarten. And it feels like we're never going to be, not friends. We're always going to be best buddies. And that goes on for like, what? I don't know, maybe even 10 years. And then you part where, your connection is not as strong any longer. That karmic connection. I mean, karmic connection means because of our actions, we have that strong connection. Yeah? It's nothing else but just because of our actions, we've done things together, so we have this strong karmic connection in that way, right? Karma means action, and so, yeah, through these, we strongly connected. But that may also fade. Now, within this lifetime, then the coming lifetimes, they're still strong enough, even though it was just 10 years. But if you think back millions and trillions of years ago, I mean, we say everyone has been our mother, yes, endless times, but that could still be the last time, could be trillions of years ago. Does that make sense?
No.
It doesn't make sense?
No, because karma expands, so it should grow.
Karma expands, but karmic connections don't expand. And karma can also be eliminated. It only grows until it's eliminated. Don't think that negative karma is not purified so often enough, not through Rajyasattva and so forth, but through positive actions, right? It's not like our karma is is always there, like the same karma. For instance, I accumulated the karma of killing Tom, right? I don't know, I killed this guy, Tom. But even without meeting the Dharma, without doing any dharmic practices, I could purify by then deciding in this life, I'm going to go and work in a hospital and help as many people as possible. So through my motivation, it may just be the case that Tom karma is being purified. So first of all, karma, yes, it magnifies, but karma changes all the time. Positive one is destroyed, negative one is purified by positive actions. Most powerful are these practices, of course, because then in a very focused way, you do purify negative karma. So it's very effective, but that doesn't mean it's exclusively the only way to purify negative karma. And a karmic connection, that doesn't, even if the karma expands, it doesn't mean the connection expands, right? A karmic connection is just that there's a closeness to a particular sentient beings because of our past actions. But that doesn't mean that this closeness grows stronger. Otherwise, also, when it's the opposite, no, even when we hate someone, that's a karmic connection, right? So even though the hatred grows, it doesn't mean the karmic connection suddenly lessens, right? It's there. So karmic connection, I think, from what you just asked, it's a good question, and Banu's question is also very good. What does it really mean? I need to think about it once again, because we keep saying it, but what does it really mean? I need to reflect on that again, and hopefully next time I've got a better answer. Anyway, someone's writing, but unfortunately it's too late for now. All right, so that was 2 hours, long time. 2 hours full of merit, that's the good news. So let's dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated all together, reflecting on bodhicitta, on emptiness, on everything we learned today. Let's take all that precious potential and dedicate it, well, first of all, towards our own enlightenment. By thinking, may this become an important cause for me to progress on the path, even if these are degenerate times, to develop everything I need to develop in order to quickly, for the benefit of all sentient beings, become fully enlightened. But in the meantime, may it also help me, may it also become a cause for our great masters, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all the other great masters, to have an extremely long life. And may our positive potential, of course, however subtle it may be, but have an impact of what's going on around us. In particular, may cause this conflict between India and Pakistan and the different conflicts in the world. May it become a cause for them to slowly die down and disappear. So with that in mind, let's recite the dedication prayers. In the snow-encircled land, you are the source of benefit and bliss. Avalokiteshvara, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain in life until samsara ends. The brave Manjushri and also Samantabhadra realize things as they are. Hence, in order to be able to follow their example, I dedicate these merits in the best way. With the dedication praised as supreme by the victorious ones of the 3 times, I completely dedicate all these roots of virtues so that I might engage in the noble bodhisattva deeds. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. All right, thank you very much, and see you on Saturday.